So my family and I would spend the summer at our college by the lake in Quebec, Canada. My stay-at-home mum lived with us there, while Dad worked in town visiting during the weekends. I had 4 brothers and a sister, and I was the youngest of the family. And back in those days, I was an 11-year-old skinny kid, prone to be teased a lot about my size, which made me really self-conscious. We were also practicing Christians, and things like nudity were considered a sin. I was therefore prude and would not even be seen in my swimming trunks outside my own family. One summer evening at the cottage, I went to bed in my jimmies with about half a ton of bedsheets on. While summer was still in force, the nights were sometimes chilly, and my mum insisted that we sleep with the window open. Built in the early 1900s, the cabin was in fact 2 cottages that my dad had sort of reunited to make one larger place for the family. My parents had their room in the larger squarish part, while us boys shared the older part that was basically a rectangle reminiscing of a mobile home. My older sister had a separate room as well. The beds were modest, I guess, but comfortable. However, that night, I remember waking up sort of half asleep, a few times as well, to change position because the mattress seemed really cold and hard for some reason. At one point, I felt the bed had become ridiculously hard, in fact, and woke me up for good. The place was pitch black, but I noticed that I couldn't see the nightlight that was always on. It was then that it suddenly struck me that I wasn't even in my room anymore. From what I could see and feel, I was laying down on my back, totally naked, outside on a big flat rock like I was some sort of offering to a god. I panicked. I was terrified because I was afraid of the dark. I had no recollection of why I was out there, and it was way too dark to see if anybody else was there watching me. So I froze stiff, completely paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle, nor utter a word. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out but breath and a low, almost inaudible sound, which got me even more scared. I felt a bug walking on my flat stomach, circling my navel and going down. It was a moth, and I hated bugs because they creeped me out a lot at that time. I imagined that it could get into some orifice, my mouth, my nose, or something, yet I couldn't move to send it away. After a bit, my eyes got used to the darkness, and for the first time I was able to make out where I was, less than 100 feet or so from the cottage. I closed my eyes, concentrated in order to calm down, and when I opened them again, I was finally able to move. And the first thing I did was slap that moth to the next town. I quickly got up, scraping my butt on the rock and hurting my left foot on a jagged edge. I proceeded to walk towards the house. The pain in my foot and my overall numbness prevented me from running. Oddly enough, too, I could feel the cold dirt and the pebbles under my feet, but I had sort of no feeling of the temperature outside at all. It should have been really chilly as I'd been out there naked for a while and there was a light breeze, but I didn't feel it. Maybe the adrenaline was just pumping through my body or something. I don't know, but I reached the door and tried opening it, but it was locked. My mum always locked the door at night when my dad was away, and these turn-of-the-century wood doors had deadlocks engaged from the inside, which means that I had to go around, but the back door was also locked in the same fashion. Fortunately, the guillotine window was open, and it was about 2 feet up the deck. And was this where I came out from? I didn't know, but I knew for sure that I would get back in that way, and without noise I entered the room and carefully slipped back into my bed and buried my head under the pillow. I remember praying that nothing had followed me through that night, and I listened to the silence and eventually slowly faded to sleep. The next morning, as I was coming to, I immediately felt my nakedness under the sheets, and I also felt an itch. I had scratch marks on my butt cheek from the rock, so I thought it wasn't just a bad dream after all. I woke up later than my brothers and sister, and it was a good thing because they hadn't noticed that I was naked in bed, or I would never have heard the end of it. They would have teased me to oblivion if I'm being honest, but I looked around, even under the bed, but I couldn't find my jimmies anywhere. So I got into my jeans and grabbed a t-shirt to join them for breakfast. I didn't know what to make of what I'd just been through. I couldn't tell my siblings because I felt that they would have not believed me anyway. Besides, being raised a Christian, I felt like admitting that I was fully naked outside was somehow a sin that I should be ashamed of. Later that morning, though, my older brother was playing outside, and we all heard his voice as he called my mum to come in and check something, and we ran to see what it was about, and he pointed high up. As I looked, I immediately recognized my pajamas hooked to the highest branches of an old 70 feet tall tree. One part was dangling over our head, the other was stuck in branches facing the lake. Everyone looked back at me, asking what the heck, but I didn't have a clue. My mum asked around, but everybody denied having anything to do with it. And to this day, I'm still at a total loss to explain what the heck happened that night. So, I just want to go ahead and apologize up front that this has a lot of build-up. Lots of things led up to what I saw last night, but I feel the need to explain it. So first, I need to give a little bit of context. I'm a painting major at a very old college. It was even a Confederate hospital in the Civil War. Every building has its own ghost story and lore. Other students seem to have fun, spooky bonfire ghost stories, but no, not the art building. We just have some genuinely scary stuff, I guess. We've dealt with things flying off the shelf, voices, whistling, knocking, footsteps, phantom elevator riders. But last night was my most intense experience by far. The building is open 24/7 and my painting final was due today, so obviously I was up there late last night. The painting final was the last on the roster for the building, so most people had cleared out, drove home, semester over. So I was up there alone for quite a while. I was painting silently when I heard two very distinct loud knocks. There's two problems with this. One, nobody came in, and two, I heard it directly in front of me, not behind me, meaning that it came from the window and not the door. But I'm on the 3rd floor. I just kind of froze and waited to see if I could hear any kind of footsteps or sign of human life or something. But it was silent. I went back to the painting, and then about 5 or 10 minutes later, the door opened behind me, and my friend came in behind me, and we both jumped pretty hard, which isn't like him. He apologized for his squirreliness and worked on his painting silently. He's not a squirrely or quiet guy. He is normally a loud, flamboyant, raunchy character, 24/7 too, who famously does not really get scared by much. I mean, every time the air conditioner would rattle or the wall would creak, we would both snap our heads up and confirm, was that the AC? And yeah. Something about the energy was just so anxiety-inducing that night. I fixed myself a cup of tea to calm my nerves, but the anxiety just formed a migraine. Another 5 minutes later, my boyfriend came in. He also looked a little worse for wear. He turned to my friend Jamie and said, "Who were you talking to in the illustration room?" Jamie tried to correct him. "I wasn't talking to anyone. I thought that I heard someone in there, but I was wrong." We all perked up a little bit as Justin said, "But I saw you in there, talking to a man. You two were by the window." Jamie said, "I heard someone talking in there, but when I looked in there, it was empty. I was standing by the window to see if the sound was from the sidewalk, was traveling in or something, but there was no one outside or in the room." We sort of sat in silence for a minute. I'm the only one in the group who believes in the supernatural. They don't. They vehemently hate ghost believers. I don't think anyone wanted to admit what they were thinking, but after a moment, Justin said, "And someone was knocking on the printmaking door earlier too." I hadn't told him about the knocking. I didn't even want to talk about it at that point, to be honest, but me and Justin were supposed to hang out that night. He left early due to a migraine. We both had migraines from the stress, I think. I stayed up there, though, with Jamie for another half an hour, still anxiety-ridden the whole time, absolutely shaking in my boots. I just couldn't get myself to calm down. I decided to go for a walk just to get myself out of the room for a bit, but that was a really bad idea. So as I was walking down the hall, I suddenly felt an intense, crushing, instinctual fear. The I'm in the woods and a cougar is after me fear. I couldn't see or hear anything. In fact, it was just so silent I could hear a pin drop, but I felt like I was being hunted. It's hard to explain, but I went from a little stress to I'm about to die in like half a second. It was horrific, and I stood there for so long just sweating it out. I felt a little smidge of bravery eventually and stomped my feet. I don't know why, I just wanted to give it a hey, to heck with you sort of thing to bring my courage up. I'm a strange person, I know that, but that will become absolutely obvious when you hear this next bit. So I started speed walking to the drawing room, and in the drawing room we have a real human child skeleton named Derek, and sometimes I go in there to talk to Derek. I know, it's weird. I'm not a perfect person, I know that, but let me talk to my toddler skeleton in peace, okay? Anyway, I got in there and turned on one of the spotlights, which is just enough light for me to get around, and headed back to Derek. I vented my grievances to him, and after a pause I said, I'm sorry, and was cut off by a loud bang behind me. I did not stay to see what it was, did not turn around, and honestly, it sounded like one of those spotlights jamming into the concrete floors. I ran out of there as soon as I got my body past the threshold of the door, and I poked my upper body back in to slam the light switch back off. That was when I saw it. Illuminated by just the edge of the spotlight was a figure, just a little too tall, about 7 to 8 feet. He was in the corner that would have been behind me while I was sitting down, and as the light turned off, I could still see his faint outline. It was like what many people describe as a shadow man, but man, he was looking at me and I was terrified. I sprinted back to the painting room, grabbed my keys, and got the heck out of there. I left my jacket, my backpack, my MacBook. I mean, who cares, right? I just wanted out at that point. And it's been so long since I felt fear like that. I haven't told anyone what happened. I really don't want to. I felt sick sharing this, in fact. I want to get this exam over and done with, and then just not ever think about that building until, well, January, when I have to go back. This happened last year between Christmas and New Year's Eve. I'm from the French Caribbean, so it's not unusual to go scuba diving during Christmas holidays. So my family and I, 25-year-old female, booked a few dives. They're really good scuba divers, way better than me. They passed a few scuba diving levels that also allowed them to participate in way more technical dives than I'm allowed to do. I enjoy scuba diving as well, and I'm able to do almost every casual dive, but I don't feel safe diving without an instructor yet. Even more if it's a dive with decompression stops required. If anyone isn't familiar with scuba diving though, here's a quick explanation. So, you can dive safely until a certain deep before the pressure becomes dangerous. If you dive below that point, which is roughly 20 meters or 65 feet, you have to do decompression stops during your ascent. It means that you have to stop while going back to the surface a certain time to let your body adapt itself to the pressure. If you ride up too quickly, you may catch decompression sickness, which can lead, in worst case scenario, to dying. So we decided that what I could manage was a little private lesson with an instructor first, prior to more exciting dives with my family. For the first day, my family was enjoying a dive on a technical spot that I wasn't feeling up to while I was alone with my instructor, and retrieving my old scuba diving reflexes. Everything went okay, and we were on a beautiful coral reef. There were many beginners on the boat, and I was by far the most experienced here. So, finally my instructor decided that he could manage me with another student, which was a true beginner, and after a small briefing with every safety rule and hand sign, which is the only way to communicate underwater, we began our descent. Everything came back to me pretty quickly, and I was enjoying myself, going back and forth to the instructor and the beginner diver. It was probably about 20 minutes, I would guess, that we were down here. Everything was perfect too, beside one thing. You see, it was a windy day and there was a really heavy swell that day. It's less of a problem underwater than it is for the surface swimmer, but the only thing is that it requires more physical effort to swim, and so my air bottle was emptying a little quicker than usual, which is pretty normal. So I signed to my instructor that I was running thin on air, and he nodded. But at this level, it was far from being critical or anything. It was at this moment, though, that I saw a young man swimming towards me. It wasn't the instructor nor any of the students. In fact, I'd never seen him before, but he was in full scuba diving gear, and we were the only dive boat on the spot, so I assumed that he was with us, and I just didn't pay attention to him on the boat. He was swimming fast towards us and then signed me that he was out of air. When an air failure happens in scuba diving, there's a very strict procedure. You have to help the person, no questions asked, because every second is vital. If you faint underwater, then you drown. On your gear, you have 2 breathing devices too. I'm not sure about the English words, but there's a main device and a spare device. So I handed the guy my spare breathing device, which means that we were both breathing on my gear, consuming twice as much air as I was consuming alone. I waited until the guy seemed calmed down and tried to hand sign to him to go see my instructor. But strangely, he nodded no and signed to me to start our ascent. I understand this procedure. I was a little low on air and above the decompression stop level, so the right thing to do was to go up to the surface before having an air failure, but I would have to tell my instructor first. The guy was very reluctant though, and it was strange because it would have taken us like 30 seconds to tell the instructor, and he would have started an ascent with us. During this time, I was sort of panicking as seeing my own air levels going down so quickly, and I saw that our instructor was staring at us quizzically and swimming towards us. It was at this moment that the guy let go of my spare air device and started swimming away, breathing again in his own breathing device. Well, I was totally lost and started my ascent with my instructor. But once at the surface, because of the tides, I was feeling dizzy and sort of nauseous, so my bizarre encounter wasn't the first thing that I debriefed. It was after I calmed down and the boat was driving towards the beach, without the strange guy, mind you, that I asked my instructor what happened. I don't know, maybe a guy who lost his group and needed some time to calm down or something? I replied with, okay, but why did he tell me that he was out of air? My instructor told me that I probably misunderstood his hand signing, that he was probably not telling me that he was having an air failure because he left breathing in his own device. But I'm certain that I saw him do the air failure sign, but okay, whatever. In any case, the next day I joined my family during my dive, and the instructor was different. It was a girl this time, Charlie. I've had time to think about that guy, and I was worried about him, so I told everything that happened to Charlie and asked her if she knew this guy, and if he was okay because I didn't see him going back to the surface. She asked me to describe him, which I did, and she told me, oh, that's Marvin. Don't worry about him. He's preparing himself to become a scuba diving instructor. Every time that he has a day off from the restaurant he's working here, he asks us to drive him on the coral reef for the morning and pick him up in the afternoons. I actually ate at his restaurant this noon and saw him, so don't worry. I was pretty relieved by that, to be honest, and told myself that it was just a big misunderstanding, probably just a sign comprehension issue or something. Anyway, the rest of the week went on without any incidents. I was doing more and more technical dives and everything went very smoothly. Charlie was a wonderful instructor and I never saw Marvin again. That is, until the last dive. So, it was New Year's Eve. We planned the best dive on that day. It was on a shipwreck and I felt trained enough to try it without any instructor, just my family and me. It was Charlie's day off. It was fairly deep for a beginner like me, like 30 meters at its down point, around 98 feet. My first day, male instructor was there and told us that he would be exploring the shipwreck too, so we would cross him and he would help me if he saw that I needed it. It was very comforting to know, in fact, and my family felt comforted too when I told them that. So we began our descent and started swimming around the shipwreck. We crossed our old instructor twice, but every time I signed him that everything was okay. And it was at that moment that, completely out of the blue, I saw Marvin swimming towards me again. At this moment, I was about 5 to 10 meters above my down point, still staying under my decompression stop level. I was a little surprised, to be honest, and even more surprised when he signed me again that he was out of air. I was mistrustful at this point, but if there were any chance that it would be true, I could not help it. So I handed him my spare breather. This time I had a lot of air left, so it wasn't a problem. He took it, started breathing in it, and then took my arm. I reached to see his air level instrument, but he prevented me from seeing it. And then he signed for me to start an ascent with him. I immediately said no. I wasn't at my deepest when he reached me. I had been deeper at this time. But I had decompression stops to do, so I saw that my father saw us, but he quickly looked away, probably not understanding what was going on. I tapped at my diving computer, a device which calculates when and how long to decompress, to signify it to him. He shrugged, smiled, and then just started swimming up, still holding me. I was sort of paralyzed for a few seconds, and the thing that helped me react was that my diving computer was telling me to stop and decompress right now. I then understood, though, that I was now in pretty serious danger, that if I let him do what he wanted, I could die from the bends. I then started screaming, only to remember that no noise can be heard underwater. I started wriggling frantically as I saw my father and sister way below me, my diving computer alerting me more and more intensely. At that moment, my father saw us and he reacted. He swam very quickly towards us, and I managed to hit this guy as my dad grabbed my ankle and suddenly dragged me deeper, and the guy quickly swam away. My dad dragged me deeper again, and then we waited for a very long decompression stop to ensure that I would be okay. Then we started heading towards the surface very slowly and cautiously, and on the surface, I just started crying frantically and went back to the boat. My father then told me that he thought Marvin was my instructor and that this is why he wasn't surprised at first. I then told my instructor everything that happened, who took it more seriously this time, and he told me to show him Marvin when we go up to the surface. The thing is, he never came. The next day, though, on New Year's, we went a last time to the scuba diving club because my little sister had a diploma to collect, and we saw Charlie. Still choked up, I told her what happened with Marvin, and then she stiffed. She told me that Marvin was at the restaurant yesterday for New Year's Eve, and that he hadn't gone scuba diving, which means that whoever this guy was, it wasn't Marvin. To this day, I still don't know who this guy was and what he wanted, and why he tried to kill me, maybe twice.